So, of course, Julieann, you were so involved with the Synod on Synodality. This was a huge part of Pope Francis's papacy. It was all about listening to one another, journeying together.
Yeah.
What was your experience of that and just seeing him leading that whole process?
Yeah, I think, funny enough, it always takes me back to when he first stepped out onto the balcony in March 2013.
2013, yeah.
And I only revisited the words he had to say there again recently because I just recalled that sense of journeying together and fraternity was very, very much at the heart of what his first words were. So everybody remembers he came out and he said, Buona sera. And I went, this is going to be different because normally we get the ubi and orbi. And when you go back and you look at it, it was just that sense of my brothers and sisters were on this great journey together. And he says journeying together about 3 times.
There was never any pomp and ceremony.
No.
Yeah.
And he talks about fraternity, everybody being on this journey together. And actually I look back and I go, there it was in black and white that he was going to bring us on this journey of what it means to be brothers and sisters in Christ journeying together, and what we now call synodality. So that always brings me back to there. And I think that that moment, I was very profound and very privileged to be in the Synod Hall when he announced that he wasn't going to take the final document away and craft a post-synodal exhortation, which we'd had before with Amoris Laetitia or Christus Vivit. This time he was just issuing the document.
Saying, I trust the process, basically, yeah.
Because, not just because he trusts the process, but because he stayed in the process.
He was part of the whole thing, yeah.
Sort of showing how to be a synodal leader by doing that in that moment.
Do you think he reflected that in that process and just in his papacy, that being on the journey together? And that walking together.
Yeah, I think so, because the other thing that stays with me from his papacy has been very much a pope on the peripheries. Going out to the margins. I don't think I'd seen in my lifetime anyway a pope that called on so much support for refugees, for prisoners, for those who feel that they were outside of, church life, and I think that a pope who constantly invites that invitation.
How does that translate from the perspective of a priest? I mean, he's trying to be the leader to Catholics all over the world, but what do you think is witness to priests like yourself or Father Declan?
Yeah, thank you, Winnie. Good question. I think if you like, it comes nearly from 2 angles. I think first of all there was a closeness. I had the lovely experience myself of concelebrating morning mass with him it was around the time of my silver anniversary, and we were all there in Rome as a class, and we concelebrated with him the morning mass. And there was certainly a desire for him to be very close to us, and he insisted on the group photograph afterwards and on meeting us individually. So I always felt that kind of a desire to be close. And yet at the same time, he wasn't afraid to actually, to speak to us directly and hit us between the eyes.
What did he tell you?
Well,
what homework did he give you?
Not personally, but keeping the sermons short. Being merciful in confession. All this
practical stuff.
Very, very real practical stuff. So as I say, that kind of closeness, but at the same time, not afraid to hit you between the eyes.
One of the things that so many people say was such a huge part of him as Pope and a person, his own personal faith, was mercy would be the word to define him.
Yeah, well, that for me, I think that's the big takeaway for me from the Francis papacy. The Jubilee of Mercy was such a key moment, and in our parish in Navan, we were designated as one of the churches for the Jubilee Year of Mercy with the Holy Door of Mercy. And I remember our outreach in terms of confessions one that year was very powerful. And in my own celebration of that sacrament ever since, I find I'm really emphasizing mercy. I think mercy was a word we kind of forgotten about, or we'd kind of allowed love, compassion, forgiveness maybe to overtake mercy, whereas Francis has put mercy back there at the heart of
I'd say
the church's spirituality.
Yeah, somewhere in that year of mercy, I just recollect the kind of constantly people using the language of what mercy means is that turning of the heart towards the person in pain in front
Yes.
of you.
Yes.
I think he really emphasized that always
Absolutely.
in the way that he lived his own
Yes.
priesthood
Yes.
and pontificate.
Mm.
Just the way he
Yeah.
was always there,
Yeah.
his own heart turning towards
Yeah.
whoever was in pain
Yeah.
in front of him. I really
Yeah.
hear that. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Your mercy, absolutely. And do you know the other thing that struck me is he co-wrote, of course, the Door of Faith
Yeah.
with Pope Benedict. It was because everyone talks about Evangelii Gaudium.
Yeah.
As you know, and I can't go, oh, well, and I love that line too, that matches with the Year of Mercy for us.
Yeah.
The door of faith is always open. And he sort of always used to say, remember, it swings both ways.
Yes.
That it wasn't a case of the door of faith being open to people come in.
Yeah.
Outreach, I think, is another
Yeah.
legacy.
And of course, we had Pope Francis visiting Ireland as part of the World Meeting of Families, and I'm sure that left an impression on so many people.
Oh, yeah.
That for me, it was wonderful, you know, for me in my lifetime to welcome a second Pope to Ireland, you know, and that was wonderful. It did leave. How do I express this? It did leave a certain disappointment with me, you know, the poor turnout in the Phoenix Park, and you know, a sort of a difficulty in mobilising, you know, the members of the Church in Ireland for the significance of this event.
I have to say, because my experience, Father Declan, of having been to different events in different countries was that in many other countries where the Pope has visited, they really got behind it. I mean, the government, the people, the media.
Yes.
For whatever reason, it was a really, it was a different atmosphere, certainly from a media perspective. That was really disappointing.
Yeah.
But I think the impression that he made for those who did engage will be lasting and powerful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think his own human charisma as well was very powerful. You know, that when you were in his presence, you know, you felt that he was a very, very charismatic individual, you know, and powerful in speaking, very honest, very direct. I think the off the cuff of Pope Francis is going to be, you know,
got lots of headlines over the years.
It did. But his ability actually just to leave the script and to actually say something
from the heart,
brutally honest,
and just be present in the moment.
Just be present in the moment. You know, I think that has been a blessing. I really do.
And one of the things that he talked about a lot was being missionaries of joy, basically.
Yeah.
You know, living out your faith in that way. That's what I think so many people around the world were very attracted to. He was I think people would describe him as popular in terms of when he would speak, the world would listen. It would always garner a lot of attention.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, wasn't he Times Magazine's Person of the Year? Things like that.
That's it.
Kind of happened. And the bridges he built, I remember the writing of that document, Laudato Si, which is about care of the earth.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
some of the contributors he brought into that, you never would have thought would have been kind of working alongside.
No, that's true. And you know, it's one like that too, when you talk about Laudato Si, isn't it lovely to think that there's like people in civil settings that are using that document as their kind of manifesto for care of creation as well. Like that is an extraordinary crossover, because normally we, you know, in civil settings or in business life, that tend to sort of leave those two worlds apart. But Laudato Si managed somehow to cross over that. I think one of the things that a lot of his writings point to, you're saying you welcome, this is your second Pope to welcome.
Yes.
Are we in a pram?
No, sorry, not at all. I walked the castle knock.
I wasn't old enough to walk into the Phoenix Park. I was old enough to be walking, but not to the Phoenix Park. But I think, you know, in that context of our three most recent pontiffs, I always think that like Pope John Paul II taught us what to believe. Benedict taught us like why we should believe it, the theologian. And Francis has been teaching us how to do it. You know, the joy of the gospel, the door of faith's always open, be merciful to each other, care for our planet. And I suppose off the back of the synod on synodality as well, the other huge one was Christian unity, ecumenism. brothers and sisters in Christ. I think that's another piece that will remain for me, that there was a really strong attempt there to say, look, there's more that unifies us than divides us.
I think another key word is proximity. And just thinking of his nightly phone call, to the Christian community in Gaza.
Was even from his hospital bed, he was
absolutely still doing it,
talking to the only Catholic parish priest there.
Absolutely.
In that pastoral relationship,
And coming back to your first question to me, Wendy, about, in terms of priesthood, there he is, as the Pope, trying to be close to people, trying to find ways, even the ways of modern communication, to be close to people. And that's a wonderful model for any priest in his ministry, in terms of being close to people.
Well, it's been lovely just to reflect with you both about Pope Francis, Julieann Moran and Father Declan Hurley. Thanks so much for being with us on The Way today.
Thanks.